Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited about this topic. I think one of the things that has been very exciting about all of the conversations that have happened in this conference have been about how we are going to make people's lives better with new technology, new opportunities, and being able to use good data to track how people are creating safer, more sustainable, and frankly freer and more peaceful lives. And there's no better topic that this is being borne out in than the one that you have today. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Chris Pimentel from who's going to talk about the South Bay Local Travel Network, and Daniel Kramer from Circuit. And so with that, Chris, let's get this slide about the South Bay Local Travel Network. And let's talk a little bit about what really drew you to that for El Segundo and why this is such an innovative new idea.
Thank you, Hilary. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem in El Segundo, and El Segundo is when you fly in, right next to LAX. And we are in many ways the gateway to the South Bay. And from there, I sit on the chair of the South Bay City's Council of Governments Transportation Committee. And in trying to build regional solutions, we saw a niche, right? A complementary service that instead of the micro-mobility that we originally conceived of with scooters and then bicycle travel, we sought to fill that with a service that we thought would provide greater access to a lot more of our residents. And in order to make that happen, we banded together as a confederation of cities to have this local travel network. And you'll see the map come up that allows it to happen in 3 phases: inland, the beach cities, and then ultimately a phase 2, which you'll see in purple when it comes up on the map, that ties together everyone and allows us to have a service that brings people together and takes pressure off our long-term commuters by filling the niche of our short-term commuters.
And since lots of people are here to talk about funding and how these are invested in, can you talk a little bit about what you use to fund phase 1 and what is going to propel you to phase 2?
For us, a part of this is we could see the technology, as it often is, was ahead of our municipal capability. And we wanted something that was going to be capital light. So we did some organizational planning and looked and saw where are the routes that make this feasible and how can we do it in a way that really is just adapting our processes without having to come up with an entirely new network of striped lanes. So it's very, very light Caltrans funding on basically wayfinding and a few stripes here and there, but it is bang for your buck. Has to be one of the more efficient, innovative programs that you might see in this thing. It's a lot of signs. It's really just a lot of signs.
Well, it's very exciting that you've got these 2 phases. What milestones do you need to hit for phase 2 to get you, or phase 1 to get you into phase 2?
Well, we want to see it's a bit of the I hate buzzwords. It is a bit of the flywheel effect, right? We have about 750, 780, we think, active neighborhood electric vehicles, which are the most apparent pieces. We have an exploding amount of electric bicycles. We have a number of privately owned scooters. But there will be a base where anecdotally we see that load hit 1,500, 2,000 vehicles in the South Bay, where we'll be able to ask for additional funding to expand, because some of these things will require the technology, the battery efficiency, to make it feasible to take just our neighborhoods and connect neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood in sort of the grand slow city network.
Mm-hmm. So since we have an international audience, can you talk a little bit about the topography, since this is a 2-dimensional map, and why this is such a unique and important network to get around?
That's actually a great point. That's a softball. I appreciate it. So much of what you perceive is we have sort of the inland plateau and the beach, which is flat. But one of the obstacles to people being able to use bicycles to get between the two is we have tremendous micro changes in elevation. El Segundo is, per square mile, per mile traveled, the hilliest city in California, which sounds kind of crazy, but it is. And in terms of the equitability of micromobility, asking people of various levels of abilities to jump on a bicycle is not realistic. So we needed dedicated spaces to allow all of these different technologies to come to bear. So this would not work if we were simply going with our bicycle map. And don't get me wrong, I ride a bicycle every day. I love it to pieces. But this is a way for us to get more internal combustion engines off the streets by providing a platform that is usable for more people. And the terrain dictates that.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I want to go to Daniel, but I have lots of other questions for you to flesh out what we're doing. Daniel, let's talk a little bit about circuit. And since we're talking about what these sort of lighter and easier vehicles are, can you describe the circuit vehicle? And I think we have a slide that shows it, and then we'll go into both of your networks.
Yeah, circuit, we're vehicle agnostic, so our biggest thing is being electric no matter what. We do have a slide, and one of the slides, one of the cars that we use a lot is an NEV. It's a 6-seater, 3 rows of 2 seats. Everyone has their own door, their own window, and they go 25. So really, focus on slow streets and safe streets.
Mm-hmm. And talk about the fare structure, because I think for both of you, what is so great about it, as we focus on equity, the cost of using these vehicles is really accessible.
Yeah, I mean, it's free to ride, but also to purchase. So, I mean, Chris talks about a lot of people in South Bay have their own, but, not everyone can. So for us to be able to have them for them to use as well and ride in provides an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. For both of you, we have a lot of people in the audience that are working on charging infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about how you charge your vehicles, since they're all electric, and the different types of vehicles that you have in the local travel network?
For us, we have looked for things that sort of adapt to the world as it is. So that's why we went with signage as opposed to asking for dedicated streets. And one of the things about the family of micro mobile vehicles, whether it's bicycles or scooters or some of the differently structured scooters, there's a number of products out there that are designed for people who aren't comfortable standing up, or the NEVs, is that they all charge on 110. Now, there are the electricians in the audience who will want to talk about the different gauges of extension cords and what makes something safe, and there's aspects to that. But the fact of the matter is, conceptually, you can drive your NEV all day, pull up anywhere that has an external outlet, and if they'll let you plug it in, you can just plug in and keep charging, irrespective of what that platform is. All of ours that we're structured around are 110s.
For us, I mean, to have a car going for 12 hours a day, of course, we need larger batteries. But you would think a resident of El Segundo or somewhere in the South Bay can go days without charging. But either way, we can use a large lithium battery and recharge overnight and come in the next day and it's ready to go. All, like you said, through 110.
Let's talk a bit about equity, and who are you able to serve that a lot of other types of these technologies are not serving right now, and maybe areas, but also I think, Chris, we talked about people who were differently abled. We talked about children. Let's get into that more.
I come armed with a pocket full of catchphrases, and I'll try not to wear you out with them, but we joke that the Micro Mobile NEV is both the first and last vehicle you are likely to own, because your 16-year-old can ride it around safely, and at the same time as they are understanding how a vehicle moves around, and as someone advances in age, and we have a significant number of in-place aging initiatives in El Segundo in particular, then an older person who is not comfortable driving, a 3,000 to 4,000 pound automobile, but at 25 miles an hour in a golf cart is very comfortable. At 25 miles an hour in one of the scooters that are specifically configured around sitting down, they're perfectly willing to do that. So we think this is a something that adds equity to the system. Again, it is a complement to all the other transit services. It takes pressure off the long-term commuter, and we just like the way that it provides people access to all of those things at the appropriate level as needed.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Circuit, we're able to serve all demographics as well. In the vehicles that we showed there, it really helps with that. I think over half of our ridership are those 50 and older, and we hear it all the time, getting in and out of the vehicles, the low floorboards, the ease of opening the door, closing the door, just makes it that much easier and makes them want to come back. Not to mention, the fact that all of our drivers are employees. They're vetted. Someone gets to know the drivers every time. You know who's picking you up, which they find comfort in.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about your Leimert Park pilot and how that really helped be a game changer, especially as the Crenshaw line was being developed? Yeah,
I mean, we started Leimert Park when it wasn't open, like you said. So, and it was also during COVID. And what we found was, it was a hard time. People weren't traveling as far. but they still had to get somewhere. And there was a reduction in bus lines, so they needed a way to do it, and it was already historically a transit desert. So just provide them another way to get to the grocery store, wherever they have to go. The other thing is, as they started to return to work, a way to get to the existing train station, to get to, say, Santa Monica, to go work at the hotel, and have us on the other end to then get on circuit again to get to their place of employment.
That's great. Seleta Reynolds, when she was head of LADOT, had a great phrase about transportation happiness, and that transportation happiness was really about freedom from conflicts, and especially in modal conflicts that we're seeing a lot on our sidewalks and our streets. Can you talk about the dimensions of the vehicles and how you're freeing people from those conflicts and really contributing to that transportation happiness?
I think modal conflict might be my new favorite euphemism. The only one allowed to ride a bicycle in the middle of the lane is me. I think that's the universality of that. No, what we have done with the local travel network is intentionally looked at what are our arterials, what are our bus routes, what are our truck routes, and migrated people off of those. So these sort of secondary roads, but are not encumbered by stop signs every block, but maybe every 4 to 6 blocks. Those are the things that we try to route people on with these slower speed vehicles. So they still achieve a mile per mile equity of speed and efficiency, but at the same time, in a 4-foot wide platform at its widest, we're certainly much smaller if you're on a scooter, there is none of the sort of game of Pac-Man that can occur when you try and navigate narrow streets with parallel parking on each side. So the smaller platform allows for a smoother flow of travel, a happier flow of travel. We have yet to see a golf cart road rage incident, but it is no doubt possible. But it is for us, it is an overall add to the atmosphere of sort of community that we experienced coming out of the pandemic. And thus far, we've had no issues with clogged arterials as a result of it.
That's great. And can you talk about also what's happening in a lot of the beach streets if you're in a car, and what it's like to try to pass each other, and some of these issues that you're avoiding because of the different space you take up?
Yeah, certainly the parallel parking on each side plays a role in constraining things, and similarly by having these routes that these other vehicles, these micromodal vehicles can take, we take pressure off the sidewalks. Your sidewalks are free for what their intended uses are, right? So people on whether strollers or wheelchairs or whichever they need have the entire access to that. And at the same time, someone who wants to use a scooter doesn't feel pressured by passing traffic or safety considerations to push to the sidewalk. They have their own dedicated routes and can get there in just the same amount of time without having to shimmy around cars.
That's great. And Daniel, can you talk a little bit about the connectivity to transit and how many people you're moving in a lot of these systems?
Yeah, I mean, that's really Circuit's whole point is, we're literally micro transit where we're really focused on that first and last mile and not looking to provide an alternative to other forms of transportation. So, our sweet spot's really that 0 to 3 square miles that's connecting to a local bus stop or a train station to get someone further. So, I mean, that's really our main focus.
So we have a lot of people who love data, including myself. Can you tell me a little bit about the data you're collecting, especially, on the CTC? We would love to know how many more people are traveling out of their cars, traveling differently, how many miles. Tell me a little bit about the data you keep and what that can do to contribute to some of the new goals to move people into zero-emission travel options.
Regionally, we're somewhat in our infancy with it. The biggest piece of it that we would like to see is because all these, particularly neighborhood electric vehicles, make it somewhat easier because those are all registered plated vehicles, as we'd like to see if we see a relative increase to those based on internal combustion registrations. I think that will be our first demarcation, is if we're making it more attractive, particularly if we see the rate of uptake in that occur. There's some other things that we think need to go into that, whether it's rebate and incentive programs to help us fuel the secondary market. But I think our first aspect we'll see, do we see uptake on that? And then selfishly, we would like to see a more complementary role that it plays to the trains. And we're getting people to trains and buses in a manner that is more, that facilitates that routing. So if we see the ridership of that increase, in a correlation. We'd have to do some backdating to see if that goes to causation, but I think that would be something that we would see as a similar indicator that we're having success in our micromobility initiative.
And I'll add on, on the data side, of course, as an on-demand service, we get all the data, pickup points, ridership, pooled rides, which, is important to us. But in interesting scenarios in San Diego, we've been there since about 2015, pre-micromobility, and what we saw when we did start seeing scooters, we saw an increase in ridership. Those scooters are getting people out of their cars. Maybe in the morning they would take a scooter to the train station, but when they get home at night, they don't want to take a scooter. They're with a friend. They need another way. So we saw a natural increase there, but it was still showing that it was getting more people out of their cars.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about women and family traveling? How are you enabling some of that? Because I think that's one of the big issues about transit is, are we going to get people out of their cars and provide the same kind of opportunities for people to travel with families, et cetera?
I think this is one of the great success stories conceptually of this, is that we have the experience of often the public sector, it lags behind technology. And in this regard, we are setting conditions to allow technology that we see works. We're allowing it to fully come to fruition. Because we have experiences, if 70% of our travel is within 3 miles, that's all well and good when it's you just walking around or driving those. When you've got a car full of strollers and soccer balls, it's a different experience. And loading up that entire vehicle to go struggle to find parking, and you spend more time parking than you did driving, is incredibly frustrating. So we think in this regard, by allowing this new fleet of modalities and giving them access in a way that makes it more attractive and easier to use them, that it is a way to fill that niche between when you need to load up the entire family truckster and go to Wally World, and as opposed to when you just need to throw it in a fit-for-purpose vehicle that goes a limited range, gets them in and out easily, and allows you certainly much easier to park.
And that's really how Circuit got our start, is on Long Island in a beach town of idling vehicles, didn't want to go too far because then they had to lug their beach chairs and bring the kids with them. But finding a way to connect to a distant parking lot that they can park in and still have a way to get everything to the beach is really what prompted Circuit.
Mm-hmm. And you raise a good question about parking, because I think parking technologies are just removing the space we're dedicating to just storing cars is a big goal for this conference. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to help change the land use around people rather than cars?
This is your business. I'll defer on that first. It's his business. So.
Yeah, I think back to convenience. I think whether it's convenient to connect to transit, whether it's convenient to connect to somewhere nearby that you're needing to go to, if it's convenient, you're more encouraged to use the service instead of just hopping in your car and then you're not having to deal with parking. But if it's not convenient, if you're going to have to take some form of transportation a certain distance and then still be left stranded to get to your final point, that's when you're going to decide just to hop in your car instead.
I think there's a lot to be said by just the pure modular nature of this, where instead of one size fits all, you have one vehicle that you're going to take and park anywhere, regardless of how many people are in it or what you needed to haul. Whereas this gives you an options where you have a full-size vehicle you might take for long-term commutes. But if you have something that's just somewhere between that and your bicycle or an NEV or a scooter, that allows you to have fit-for-purpose vehicles for that. In ours, like I said, a 4-foot wide vehicle, you're talking about a 2-for-1 effectively on normal parking space. So you can park 3 of these in the widths you would for 2 cars. And we certainly have places where we adapt angled parking around it. We have specialized parallel and tandem parking around it. But we can visually see, and it's easy for a lot of our beach cities because we closed some of our streets for pandemic dining. And we can see the effects of having specialized parking because it takes pressure off those roadways.
You talked about the DMV and licensing these vehicles. Can you talk a little bit about just the process, again, for people who are here from other countries, the process of getting your driver's license, when you do it, and how you permit the vehicles through the DMV?
Well, the licensing and registration is effectively no different than a vehicle with a car. It's significantly cheaper, but it's no different than a car. I have the very selfish experience of having a young teenager that I'm far more comfortable him learning to drive a golf cart in circles than I am necessarily driving my grandfather's Mustang in circles. So there's an aspect of the learner's process of it. You know, it gives people a greater feel. Parallel parking a golf cart is certainly much more difficult, actually, than a full-size automobile because the
Backup
power steering
camera.
isn't there. No backup camera, no way to cheat. You got to look over your shoulders. So there is a little bit of a salutary benefit, you know, an unintended benefit from this that comes out. But in terms of the licensing regime and what it takes to bring these in, you do have to have insurance. Right, you do have to have this. You have to have a serviceable vehicle, and in that regard, it is no different than any other car in California, which gives us a little bit of also a data window into what our total utilization is.
That's great. I know we wanted to also show the slide of the signage because I think maybe you can talk a little bit about wayfinding and how important wayfinding is to this network moving well.
So there is. The turtle, I should say, this is not approved. These are the draft, and I'm not in charge of creativity. But I think there's an important message that these are slow cities, and we want to make sure that people understand, you know, revving up and going to 40 miles an hour just to go to a stop sign does not necessarily get you there much more quickly than a consistent 25-mile-an-hour trip in those local travel network roads. So in that regard, with turtle, the turtle's happy, it makes you smiling, but it is something that's also distinctive in its visual. So we want it to be arresting so people understand, they understand where they're going. It conveys that the rate in which you're traveling is designed to be slow and pleasant, but it's also unlike any other sign out there. So it's a little bit kitschy, but we hope it catches on.
Yeah. We are working on more of the active transportation program funds and opportunities to have bike lanes, and especially to think about lanes dedicated to e-bikes, and now those e-bikes can go 25 miles an hour. Can you talk a little bit about your vision of how e-bikes and your vehicles can interact so that we can start having more mobility, less conflicts, and just, you know, be able to slow everything down?
You know, I think that's almost what we will see as these vehicles sort of mature, that people are going to parse out, you know, active mobility, and a pedaling bicycle will almost exist in a category of its own on this. You know, for all of our routing and what we see with sort of the electric micro mobile vehicles, those are kind of their own lane. And people who are going to the active cyclist, the person who goes out there with a very light bicycle and the spandex and goes for it, they are going to stay in the sharrows that we already have. We have a very robust bicycle network, cycle network, and those people are going to bicycle in that manner because honestly, 25 miles an hour for them is often too slow. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who will maintain a steady 30 mile an hour pace, and they'll be 50 on the downhill, and that's not something complementary with our slow cities, or I shouldn't say it's complementary. It is not necessarily co-located with our local travel network. So there's certainly like their bicycle, they're allowed to be anywhere. But I think our experience thus far is that they tend to hew more to the sharrows that are in our cycle network than they are going to the local travel network roads.
A little bit more about how because you see a lot of cyclists also in these beach cities and in Leimert Park. Tell me how you interact and what it means to have everyone gets their own door for 6, which is pretty exciting. How does that extend the walk, extend the ride? And I like the one way you can have many other trips in one day.
Yeah, I mean, to the point on the bikes, you know, we haven't been lucky enough to have, you know, split slow lanes. So we historically travel in the regular right of way. So normally there is a separate bike lane. So we're not, you know, dealing with the bikes. We're going sometimes slower than the bikes, but we haven't had much issue with bikes. And sorry, I forget the second question.
The second question was about how everybody has their own door, which I think is really a neat thing, especially in a vehicle for 6, and how that then lends itself to maybe people traveling one way, like during the day, and then with you at night. What are you finding in terms of how people are changing their travel patterns or using Circuit to come from the grocery store or certain trips?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think it depends on the purpose of the trip. I think if it's going to work or going to the grocery store, oftentimes they're by themselves. But you know, if it's nightlife, if it's tourism, that's when we're seeing the larger groups. So we definitely get a mix, but we also pool our rides together too. So you might be requesting for a ride by yourself, but you're getting into a car with one or two other people. So oftentimes we do not have just one person in our car.
People talk about the fact that the return to work has been it's been a barrier about the commute, that people really do not want to come back to these like grinding, awful commutes. And what they want is predictable, clean, accessible, safe. Can you talk a little bit about how you're helping people to access jobs, access job training? Because we're going to be rebuilding this economy slowly after we get, out of COVID, which we're not yet. So how are you filling some of these gaps and getting people comfortable with getting out of the house and doing more things?
I think the most difficult part of the long-term commute, right? The part we dread is the grinding bumper to bumper gas brake portion of long-term vehicle commutes. For this is such a complementary role and such an ability to right-size that travel that for every one of these, the vehicle off the road, you take off the 405 because somebody was able to just take the golf cart or take a scooter and take it to the train and have a clean, safe train experience. There are these virtuous cycles you get into from that. And the side effects of it, if more people are taking the train gets nicer sort of phenomenon. And I don't want to derail us to that too much. But the idea that you can do it, and if you are commuting, if you're fortunate enough to commute within 3 miles of your home to work, which 70% of these trips are, then having a really fun ride to work in the morning, an invigorating ride with a somewhat indoor-outdoor experience, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's somewhat unique to the South Bay. Is I think an easier way to coax people back than introducing themselves to the 110-105 interchange, which some of us experience.
I mean, I think we're lucky that we're seeing someone like an LA Metro, expanding their footprint here, and I think that's the biggest thing is if you're not working within that 3-mile radius, that you have a way to get to work, and and you're more inclined to use a first and last mile service to do it.
How, if people want to replicate your services, how do they go about it?
The most important part is collaboration. I mean, it really is, and we have a very tight organization of cities. But I think that when you work in subregions that work well together, if one city wants to go out and do this by themselves, it's certainly doable. But finding a way that confederates cities together with a travel network and a network of networks, the proverbial, we are one of our catchphrases, right? Neighborhoods connected to neighborhoods sort of pieces, networks connected to neighborhoods. That's what makes it really viable. If everyone in El Segundo was commuting only within El Segundo, or everyone in Torrance only in Torrance, I mean, that has a benefit. But the idea that conceivably you could get on a scooter or an electric bike in El Segundo and commute to Torrance, or start at the foot of the hill in Redondo and go all the way to Inglewood. There isn't I think a sort of a mind-blowing concept. And we are not far from that. I mean, the battery and motor technologies in these vehicles will allow for that. So it's a matter of us getting rid of some barriers to entry, and I don't want to jump questions, but getting some of the barriers to entry of the electric market out. But having a confederation of cities that allow us to provide and facilitate the use of those technologies, it just requires some collaboration, and not much more, and some signs with a turtle.
That's fantastic.
I think for us, it's finding the transit deserts. It's not oversaturating by replicating another form of transportation. It's who's lacking, like a Limber Park that we did, where they didn't have many options. So fill in that gap rather than going to an area that already has several options.
And how much are the golf carts, if you will, how much are they just generally, not the tricked out ones, but just a general basic one in terms of accessibility to someone who wanted to have a vehicle like that?
There's a barrier to entry, right? There's a barrier to entry to an electric sedan. There's a barrier to entry to an electric vehicle, and there's certainly a barrier to entry to a brand new electric golf cart. A golf cart, you spend $20,000 on it. That's not the golf cart we see in the South Bay, actually, though. We have a robust secondary market, which takes that down like any used car. You take somebody down in our we're certainly in the 4-digit numbers on that secondary market. And I think with some things we'd like to see the state of California do with rebates and things to make that more attractive, but also the more that are out there, the more that secondary market flowers and reduces those barriers to entry.
That's great. And then how much would a circuit vehicle, how much would someone need to invest in order to have a circuit system operating in their city or their
Yeah, I mean, circuit, we provide a turnkey service, but the cost really depends on things like hours of operation, the size of the service area, to really dictate how many cars are needed to service that area. Our cars that we pay are much more expensive, but because of safety and comfort, things like that, in battery range, really drive up that cost. But let us buy it, and no.
And by having it free, you don't need to integrate with a tap system or something like that.
Yes, but we can. We do charge fares in some areas, and if a agency or city wanted to have that, we can certainly do that.
That's great. Could we take maybe a couple questions from the audience? Is there anyone with questions about the system? It's so exciting. Yes, please.
In the El Segundo example, when you talk about EV bikes and bikes, I'm curious, in our area, there's a lot of pushback from bike riders who insist that installations of facilities be on the very busiest boulevards, removing traffic lanes, and we have a constant philosophical debate between, well, do you let cars have some streets and move the bikes to those secondary roads where it's safer to ride? Did you encounter any of that? And if so, how did you handle that?
Well, anytime you deal with bicycles, there's two different groups you have to deal with, right? The cyclist, the commuter cyclist, of which I've been one, so I understand the argument, and then these kids on the bikes aspect. And as electric bike technology gets cheaper, there's a lot more of the these kids aspects. So we have to actually deal with this with almost sort of two hats on. We want cyclists, the proverbial these kids, we want them off the main roads. We really do. And not because we don't like bikes or anything like that. This is a safety issue. People like the 14-year-old mini Viking I live with, it does not need to be competing with buses and those things. But someone who commutes on that bike and someone who's a real cyclist, that is a means of conveyance. Right? And they need to be on main thoroughfares because that is the most efficient way to get them there. We have overcome that as a region, or attempted to overcome and facilitate it, with pretty significant share demarcations. So when you're within our bike master plan, our regional bike master plan, you're going to know, not by a dedicated lane, but you are going to see in every block something that indicates to you as a rider that you are in an extra wide lane, not prohibitively extra wide, but slightly wider lane, and you will be sharing with bicyclists. And by moving that share demarcation to the right side, we very subtly encourage our somewhat aggressive bicycle riders that it's easier on all of us if they hew to the right side of that lane. And so we try to just sort of engineer some human behavior around that in dealing with our two very distinctive interest groups of bicycle riders.
I think we have time for one more question, Anna. Is that right? One more. All right. Excellent.
Hello, thank you for both speaking on this. This kind of stems from the last panel discussion that was here. What are you doing to integrate public and private partnership, and how are you going to facilitate the development of new innovative ways of transportation like the circuit and this alternative form of transportation so that it works and it is, broad-based to more communities, to more spaces where it can have real impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally most of what we do is public-private. I mean, all of our programs are typically funded by some sort of public entity. So when we're designing a program, it's either them fully designing it or obviously with their input. So it's just kind of a natural partnership, and we're staying in touch with them obviously, and on a regular basis, looking at data and seeing what could be changed, what can be scaled, hopefully to help more people. And
for us on the municipal end, the biggest part of that is the endpoints. You know, we want the last mile micromodality, whether it's to a train or to a restaurant or wherever. But the poor part is, if you own it, it's where do you leave it while you're there? You know, do we have to facilitate parking or docks? That might be part of the answer. But for us, a lot of it is how do we figure out how to incorporate services in sort of this family of well, it can't quite be on demand. It's got to have that tension between ubiquity and on demand services to get people to use it. You know, it doesn't do us any. It does us marginally less good to replace a park and ride with a giant pile of scooters and electric bicycles. You know, that's only part of the way there. So for us, it's a matter of finding a way that is commercially attractive to these families of vehicles. They can actually make a reasonable profit, and for us is something that we can effectively track, monitor, and ensure that the tax money we're spending on it is being spent for a high value service and not a pet project just because I like golf carts sort of thing, which is a real, I mean, and those are the tensions that these things actually drag with them. So
Have you gotten good feedback from taxpayers or from the local community?
So we know what they want, right? They want ubiquity of service. And for a long time, we had I'll drag this on and make this about me.
That's good.
No, we used to have a fleet of basically converted old short school buses, right? They were the El Segundo transit piece, and we had some that we would use to shuttle around. You could go down to Manhattan Beach with it because we were at a little bit of an island. We have to go around a refinery. We did away with those because they were gas guzzler, they're gas intensive, they were lightly used. To a lot of the equity of usage pieces, they were hard to get in and out of because they were old school buses. They had steep steps to get in. You know, by school bus statute, they had to sit across the rider line. There were all those things that were barriers to entry. So we know we have a demand for it. The hard part is when you take that from a publicly offered service and finding the right way to monetize a ubiquitous service that, again, is commercially attractive to them and fits our need. It's there. It's there. It's a matter of, for us, failing quickly so we can, we'll miss on this side, miss on that side, and then trying to find sort of the happy medium. That just takes time and your willingness to absorb angry taxpayers sometimes.
Well, with that, I want to thank you guys for sharing your afternoon with us. This was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to having you talk in the break and find out more about these great projects. Thanks again.